He didn't forget to lock the safe. He left it open deliberately, cautiously, and with calculated intent. Not out of carelessness, but because he was searching for something far more valuable than money honesty. Julian Carter was never the type to do anything without a reason. The heavy door of the safe couldn't have opened on its own. It was the final trap constructed like a silent test, meant for only one person, the one who had entered his life without triggering his instinctive defense systems. That day, the experiment was staged as meticulously as a wordless play. In a red brick mansion lying quietly outside Savannah, where every step echoed through emptiness, Julian once again sat behind rows of screens, his heart pounding louder than the hum of surveillance cameras. That man wasn't always this cold. There was a time when the name Julian Carter held weight across oceans, whispered in elite financial meetings, and etched boldly on Forbes magazine covers. He had once been the voice behind a global logistics empire, powerful, clear, and trusted. But now in his early 40s, all that remained was silence. Because silence doesn't betray. Silence doesn't pretend to care. And above all, silence never lies. Julian Carter lived in a mansion straight out of an architectural magazine, towering red brick walls, cool marble floors, iron gates blocking the path, and inside 26 rooms large enough to lose oneself in. Yet within all that vastness, only one set of footsteps remained his own. Some called him eccentric. Others whispered he was dangerous. But in truth, he was just a man who had lost everything that truly mattered and learned never to trust anyone again. He once fired a gardener for asking too many questions. No one knew that beneath those harmless inquiries was a deeply personal betrayal. His son once tried to declare him mentally unfit in court to seize control of the family trust. His daughter, once terrified of storms and always curled up in his lap, left behind an empty bank account and vanished without a word. Even his most trusted friend, his personal doctor, had forged treatment invoices and pocketed thousands behind his back. That's when Julian learned the bitter truth. People don't just lie. They watch, they wait, they betray, and still smile at you as if nothing happened. Betrayal doesn't make noise. It comes through familiar smiles, soft touches, and sometimes through the very voice that once brought you comfort. But Julian's greatest pain didn't come from betrayal. It came from loss. When Grace, his gentle wife, and the only light in his skeptical world passed away from cancer, all color faded with her. Grace loved wildflowers in the hallway. She loved the scent of fresh bread in the morning. She had turned a cold, high-security residence into a home filled with life. But as illness took her day by day, hour by hour, Julian could only watch helplessly as the love of his life dissolved into the void. After her death, the house became an empty mausoleum. He didn't repaint. He didn't move a single one of Grace's belongings except for the library, her favorite room. He kept it untouched like a private sanctuary where her memory could still breathe. Though Julian had stopped trusting people, he never stopped loving Grace. That love, fragile yet unbreakable, was the final thread keeping what was left of his humanity intact. From that point on, Julian's life was a strict routine. Coffee at 6:00 a.m., oatmeal at 6:30, a short email check, then hours glued to the surveillance screens. He watched every Apple delivery, wondering which one might be poisoned. The man who once orchestrated global shipping routes now lived like a prisoner in his own fortress of fear. Then one morning, like every other morning, as sunlight filtered through thick curtains, yet failed to warm the cold air, Julian finally acknowledged what he had tried so long to ignore. His body was failing. The hand that once signed billion-dollar deals now trembled when pouring coffee. The legs that once marched confidently down marble halls tired after just a few steps. This time it wasn't someone hurting him. It was time itself wearing him down silently, relentlessly. And for the first time in years, Julian needed someone. He picked up the phone, hesitating, as if opening a door he wasn't ready to walk through. Eventually, he called a staffing agency in Atlanta. His voice was sharp but steady. The list of requirements he gave was as long as a security checklist: no criminal history, no social media, no talking, no curiosity, no questions. All he wanted was someone to do the job without interfering, without disrupting the stillness. 3 profiles were sent over. 2 were dismissed in seconds. But the third made him pause. Zaria Brooks, age 27, quiet, disciplined, precise. The file said she was driven by purpose, not profit. Julian scoffed. He'd heard that line too many times. But this time, something made him read it again. Perhaps deep down, just barely, some small part of him still wanted to believe. Tuesday morning. Julian sat in his usual surveillance room. The screens flickered on, revealing still frames, and then her. She stepped off an old bus into the pale morning light. Zaria Brooks. No makeup, no high heels. Just a modestly dressed woman walking with straight posture, carrying nothing but a worn canvas bag. And eyes that didn't waver. When Julian opened the door, she didn't beam with charm. She didn't offer pleasantries. She simply stood waiting for permission, as if understanding this wasn't just a house, but a world governed by invisible rules. He led her into the dust-covered sitting room where the velvet sofa had faded with time. Before he could speak, she broke the silence, not with a greeting, but a question that made him stop mid-thought. For the library, should I just dust the shelves, or would you like the books arranged by height? Julian could barely believe it. Everyone else had asked about pay time off hours. No one had ever asked him something so specific, respectful, and in tune with memory. He replied softly, "Just dust. Everything else. Leave as it is." She nodded, made a bold note in her notebook, then continued with short, appropriate questions, never once mentioning his past, his fortune, or his notoriety. When she left that day, Julian watched her figure disappear on the security screen, and for the first time in years, someone had entered his house without making him afraid. The next morning, before the sun had cleared the tree line surrounding the mansion, Julian stood alone at the end of the East Wing hallway, a place no one had ever been allowed to enter. A heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a hidden room. Not just the vault of his assets, but the remnants of a life he used to live. Inside, warm lighting glowed over stacks of cash jewelry boxes, gold bars, property deeds, and a single folded note, the safe code placed in plain sight on a wooden table like a forbidden fruit. Julian left the safe door slightly ajar, just enough for anyone to notice. It was a quiet invitation. A test. An unspoken whisper. I'm rich. You're poor. And no one's watching. But Julian was watching. Back in the surveillance room, he settled into his worn leather chair, eyes fixed on the monitor. His heart beat louder than the soft hum of the cameras. This time he wasn't reviewing data. He was placing a bet. At exactly 8 a.m., Zaria arrived. As usual, she worked silently, methodically, dusting corners, adjusting cushions, sweeping the floor. Not once did she glance at the lavish objects around her, until she approached the East Wing hallway. Julian leaned forward. Zaria paused. She saw the door. She noticed the golden glow. Her hand hovered midair. Julian held his breath. He had seen that look in people's eyes before, and he knew what usually came next. But this time, Would it be different? Part 7. Between an open door and a closed conscience, Zarya stood still. In front of her was the open safe room, its soft golden light spilling gently outward just enough to illuminate thick stacks of cash boxes of glittering jewelry and a small slip of paper that seemed harmless but held ultimate power, the combination code. She didn't step in, not even an inch. Instead, she slowly backed away, took out her phone, and made a call. Julian, watching through his security monitors, strained to read the movement of her lips. "I found the safe door open. Should I lock it or wait for instructions?" No panic, no theatrics. Just a report delivered like a true, trustworthy guardian. Julian didn't move. What he felt wasn't fear, but surprise. Genuine surprise. Someone had just passed a test. But he wasn't letting his guard down yet, because he knew people are good until the reward is big enough to betray even themselves. Then Zarya's phone buzzed again. Another call, this one missed. From her mother. Julian zoomed in. On Zarya's face, the features shifted fast, lips pressed tight, rapid blinking voice cracking as she whispered, "I'll find a way. I won't let us lose the shop, Mom." Her family was on the brink of bankruptcy. Their small convenience store, their only source of income, was set to be seized unless they paid $38,000 by the weekend. Her mother's voice trembled on the line, and Zarya's tears fell silently. After the call, she turned back toward the safe. It was still ajar like an invitation. One step, and her family's future could be saved. No one would know. No one was watching. Julian was unimaginably rich. She was just the help. Who would lose? Who would even care? A roar echoed inside her. "Take it." Just a little. Save Mom. But another voice, softer yet clearer, rose from deeper within. "Not like this. You didn't grow up to trade your soul." Zarya stood there frozen between the long hallway and the open vault. Behind her gentle morning light, ahead quiet temptation. No pressure, no chaos. Just a truth that whispered. One step, one touch, and the weight of financial burden would vanish. But something inside her wouldn't allow it. She blinked hard, drawing in a deep breath like she was pulling the last of her willpower into her lungs. Tears still hung on her lashes, but her gaze had changed. Not confused, not defiant, just quietly resolute. She stepped forward. Julian, watching the screen, held his breath. Zarya reached for the paper with the code. Not to use it, but because she knew she could. And then she did the unexpected. She typed a random sequence into the keypad. Beep. The vault re-locked. The heavy steel doors sealed shut. No one had asked her to. There was no directive. But she chose the right thing, even as her heart begged for a way out. Zarya folded the code slip and tucked it into her pocket. Then she sank onto a nearby chair, buried her face in her hands, and wept. Not out of guilt, but because staying upright against temptation sometimes costs your peace. Upstairs, Julian Carter said nothing. He didn't move, but in his eyes, for the first time in a long, long time, something shifted. It wasn't relief. It was respect. Julian kept watching. Every camera was trained on her, every breath, every blink captured. And he saw her stay. Zarya didn't leave. She sat still in front of the sealed vault. Didn't fidget. Didn't try to explain to anyone. She simply remained. Quiet. Like someone born to protect what didn't belong to her. 2 hours passed. No call. No bonus. Just a silent hallway, a young woman, and a kind of commitment too quiet to name. Julian watched her without blinking. She didn't know she was being observed. But she didn't need to. Because what she did wasn't for proof, it was for principle. He noted the way she sat upright, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes calm but focused. At times the tears would still fall, not out of anxiety anymore, but as release from the inner war no one else could see. Julian had seen people lie. He'd seen them fake, manipulate, take, and always justify. But Zarya was different. She didn't take a thing, and she didn't need anyone to know that. For the first time in a decade, Julian's heart thawed just enough for something warm and fragile but real to seep in. Not gratitude, not relaxation. Trust. Part 10. Seeing a person, not a suspect. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Julian stood up. No orders, no notes. Just the simple act of standing like his body finally responded to something it hadn't trusted in years. The instinct to step out of the shadows. He walked down the staircase slowly, each step echoing through the cold marble hallway like it always had. But this time the sound wasn't ominous. It was courteous, like a polite announcement to let her know he was coming. Zarya heard the footsteps and rose instantly. Her face still bore the marks of exhaustion and tear trails, but in her eyes there was a quiet strength no amount of money could ever buy. Julian stopped a few feet away. He looked at her for a long time. Not with suspicion, but recognition. "You." "Stayed," he said, voice low, but strangely gentle. Zarya nodded. "I found the safe door open. I called your secretary. Then I waited to ensure nothing went wrong." Julian paused for a few moments, then quietly said, "I know." She furrowed her brow slightly. "You knew I see everything," he admitted without evasion. "There are cameras throughout the house. I saw how you handled it." There was a pause, but no tension anymore, only honesty. Zarya looked into his eyes, perhaps a little disappointed, or perhaps feeling the weight of having been tested without warning. But when she finally spoke, her tone remained kind. "I understand. This is your home. You have every right to protect it." Julian studied her for another moment, then slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He held it out to her. "Inside is a check. $50,000. It's yours. You've earned it." Zarya looked at the envelope, then back at him, and gently pushed it back into his hand. "I can't accept it. Doing the right thing doesn't need a reward. I did it because I believe everyone should do the same." Julian blinked. For the first time in years, he had to ask himself, maybe. Not everyone has a price. Julian remained where he stood, holding the envelope she had just returned. His expression genuinely puzzled. Not because he'd never been refused before, but because this was the first time he'd been refused by someone who expected nothing at all. His voice dropped, no longer that of a CEO who once ruled the logistics empire, but of an aging man honestly trying to understand why. "Why are you like this?" Zarya was quiet for a while, as if weighing whether to reveal something she had kept since the day she submitted her application. Then she spoke, no flair, no dramatics, just the plain, unpolished truth. "Years ago, my cousin got sick. My family was nearly bankrupt. We were desperate, until we received a call from the hospital. The entire medical bill had been paid by an anonymous donor. We never knew who it was." She lifted her eyes to meet his. "Until I got the interview invitation here and saw your name on a list of longtime hospital benefactors. That's when I knew you were the one who helped my family back then. I didn't come here to take anything. I came to serve because I'm grateful." Silence fell over the room. Julian said nothing, but in that moment his gaze softened. His lips parted slightly, wanting to say something but unable to find the words. He remembered that donation, one of hundreds, maybe thousands from his heyday. A tiny name on a medical relief ledger, a fleeting signature. He never thought he'd meet someone whose life was shaped by something he had long forgotten. And now she stood before him, taking nothing, asking nothing, returning in quiet dignity, something even rarer than money, faith in humanity. Julian turned and walked slowly toward his oak desk by the window. Each step seemed lighter, not from age, but because something within him had quietly melted. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old leather briefcase, faded to deep brown, unlocked it, and removed a binder wrapped in worn calfskin, embossed in faded gold ink, Winter's Trust Foundation. Julian turned back. He placed the binder gently into Zaria's hands, not casually, but with reverence, almost like absolute trust. "I created this foundation years ago. A nonprofit for families like yours once was, but I never found anyone I could entrust it to. Until today." Zaria trembled slightly. She looked down at the folder as if it were too heavy, too sacred, far beyond anything she expected when she walked into this house. "As a maid." "I'm just a housekeeper, sir." Julian shook his head and looked at her not like a man scrutinizing a stranger, but like someone seeing his younger self reflected in her strength. "No. You are the first among hundreds who've crossed that door, whom I can look in the eye and say, 'You reminded me what it means to be a good person.'" Zaria said nothing. She only clutched the folder tighter. Her heart pounded not out of surprise, but because she knew this wasn't a reward. It was a calling. She bowed her head. Julian didn't need more thanks. He simply said one sentence. Softly, but it echoed in eternity. "Family isn't built on bloodlines. It's built on trust."